Marcus Rivera had always been the quiet kid in the corner of every classroom, the one who helped bandage scraped knees during recess while other children played war games with sticks. His mother, Elena, often found him in their small apartment's kitchen, carefully wrapping his toy soldiers in strips of torn cloth, pretending to heal their invisible wounds. She never thought much of it then, but looking back, she would realize that her son had been preparing for his calling since he was 7 years old. Growing up in East Los Angeles, Marcus witnessed violence that most children his age only saw in movies. Drive-by shootings were not uncommon on his street, and he had seen too many people lying on the pavement, bleeding and scared, waiting for ambulances that sometimes took too long to arrive. When he was 12, his neighbor, Mr. Gonzalez, collapsed from a heart attack right in front of their apartment building. Marcus was the first to reach him, and though he didn't know proper CPR, he stayed with the old man, talking to him and keeping him calm until the paramedics arrived. Mr. Gonzalez survived, and he never forgot the boy who held his hand during the worst moment of his life. High school brought new challenges for Marcus. While his friends dreamed of college scholarships or quick money from questionable activities, Marcus spent his afternoons volunteering at the local clinic. Dr. Sarah Chen, a volunteer physician who ran free health screenings for the community, took notice of the serious teenager who showed up every day after school. She taught him basic first aid, how to take blood pressure, and how to talk to patients who were afraid or in pain. Marcus absorbed everything like a sponge, asking thoughtful questions that surprised even Dr. Chen. "You have good hands," she told him one afternoon as he carefully cleaned a child's scraped elbow. "More importantly, you have a good heart. That's not something you can teach." When Marcus turned 18, college seemed like an impossible dream. His family couldn't afford the tuition, and while he had good grades, they weren't spectacular enough for the scholarships he applied for. The military recruiter who visited his school painted a picture that caught his attention immediately. They would train him as a combat medic, give him real medical experience, and help pay for college afterward. It wasn't the path he had originally planned, but it felt right. Elena cried when Marcus told her about his decision to enlist. She had lost her brother in Vietnam decades earlier and had hoped her son would find a different way. But when she saw the determination in Marcus's eyes, the same look he had worn as a child when bandaging his toy soldiers, she knew she couldn't change his mind. Basic training at Fort Benning was harder than Marcus had expected. The drill sergeant seemed determined to break down everything that made him who he was and rebuild him into a soldier. He struggled with the weapons training, not because he couldn't handle the guns, but because everything in his nature rebelled against the idea of causing harm. During one particularly brutal session on the firing range, Sergeant Williams noticed Marcus hesitating before each shot. "Rivera," Williams barked. "What's your problem, babe? Soldier?" Marcus lowered his rifle and looked the sergeant straight in the eye. "I joined to save lives, Sergeant. This feels wrong." The other recruits snickered, expecting Williams to explode. Instead, the grizzled veteran studied Marcus for a long moment. "Listen up, recruit. In combat, sometimes the only way to save lives is to end others. The enemy doesn't care that you're a medic. If they're shooting at your buddies and you're the only one who can stop them, what are you going to do? Let your friends die because you're too good to pull a trigger?" That night, Marcus lay in his bunk thinking about Williams's words. He thought about Mr. Gonzalez, about all the patients at Dr. Chen's clinic, about the children he had helped over the years. He realized that his commitment to saving lives might sometimes require difficult choices. The next morning, he returned to the firing range with a new understanding. He would learn to fight, not because he wanted to hurt anyone, but because protecting others might require it. The transition to medical training was like coming home for Marcus. At the Army Medical Department Center in San Antonio, he excelled in every class. Anatomy, physiology, trauma care, field medicine. He absorbed it all with an enthusiasm that impressed his instructors. Staff Sergeant Linda Martinez, a veteran medic who had served 3 tours in Iraq, became his mentor. "You've got natural instincts," she told him after watching him work on a training dummy during a simulated mass casualty event. "But instincts aren't enough in combat. You need to be able to work under pressure, with bullets flying over your head and your friends screaming for help. The training scenarios we do here are nothing compared to the real thing." Martinez was right. The training scenarios, realistic as they tried to make them, couldn't replicate the chaos and terror of actual combat. Marcus excelled in the controlled environment of the classroom and training field, but he wondered how he would react when faced with real wounds, real blood, and real danger. His fellow trainees came from all backgrounds. There was Thompson, a former paramedic from Chicago who wanted military experience before returning to civilian emergency medicine. Jackson was a farm kid from Iowa who had grown up helping his veterinarian father and figured human medicine couldn't be much different. Williams, not the sergeant, but Private Williams, was following in his grandfather's footsteps. The old man had been a medic in Korea and had filled young Williams's head with stories of saving lives under fire. Marcus formed close bonds with his training cohort. They studied together, practiced procedures on each other, and shared their fears about the deployment that would surely come. Thompson worried about freezing up under fire. Jackson feared he wouldn't be smart enough to handle complex trauma cases. Williams was afraid he wouldn't live up to his grandfather's legacy. Marcus kept his own fears to himself. He worried that when the moment came, he might choose saving a life over following orders, and that his compassion might get people killed. The advanced combat training phase tested them all. They learned to provide medical care while wearing full combat gear, how to establish aid stations under simulated enemy fire, and how to make life or death decisions in seconds. Marcus's squad was put through a particularly intense scenario where they had to treat multiple casualties while under sniper fire. As he worked on a mannequin with simulated chest wounds, blank rounds cracked overhead and instructors shouted at them to move faster. "Rivera, your patient is dying! What are you going to do about it?" Sergeant Martinez yelled. Marcus's hands moved automatically, sealing the chest wound and establishing an IV line while staying low to avoid the simulated sniper fire. He had learned to compartmentalize, to focus completely on the medical task while remaining aware of the tactical situation. It was a skill that would prove crucial in the months ahead. As graduation from medical training approached, Marcus received his orders. He would be attached to Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 75th Infantry Regiment, deploying to Afghanistan. The 75th Infantry had a reputation as a solid unit with experienced leadership and good cohesion. Captain David Morrison, who commanded Bravo Company, had specifically requested an experienced medic, and while Marcus was new, his training scores and recommendations had caught Morrison's attention. The last weekend before deployment, Marcus went home to Los Angeles. Elena had prepared all his favorite foods, and relatives he hadn't seen in months came to visit. His younger sister, Maria, had just started her sophomore year in high school. She was proud of her brother, but scared for him too. "Promise me you'll come back," she said as they sat on the apartment's small balcony, looking out over the city lights. Marcus wanted to make that promise, but his training had taught him not to make guarantees he couldn't keep. Instead, he hugged her close and said, "I promise I'll do everything I can to come home safe." Dr. Chen came to the family gathering, bringing a gift that surprised Marcus, a small leather-bound journal. "Write in this," she told him, "not about the things you can't talk about, but about the people you help. Remember that every life you save matters, no matter how small the gesture might seem." The night before he left for Afghanistan, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked through his old neighborhood, past the clinic where Dr. Chen had taught him, past the spot where Mr. Gonzalez had collapsed years earlier, past the elementary school where he had first started bandaging scraped knees. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this point, From a quiet kid who wanted to help people to a combat medic about to deploy to a war zone. At dawn, Elena drove him to the airport. They didn't talk much during the ride. Everything important had already been said. As she hugged him goodbye at the security checkpoint, she whispered, "Remember who you are, mijo. No matter what happens over there, don't lose yourself." The flight to Afghanistan was long and uncomfortable. Marcus sat with other soldiers from his unit, some veterans heading back for their second or third tours, others like him facing combat for the first time. The veterans shared stories and advice, some helpful, some terrifying. They warned him about the heat, the dust, the constant vigilance required to stay alive. But they also told him about the Afghan people they had met, the children who waved at convoys, the village elders who wanted peace as much as anyone. Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, the battalion commander, addressed the new arrivals during their in-processing at Bagram Air Base. He was a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes, someone who had seen too much war over too many deployments. "You're here to do a job," Patterson told them. "Some of you are here to fight, some to build, some to heal. All of you are here to serve. The Afghan people have been at war for decades. They're tired, they're scared, and they need to see that we're here to help them build something better. Do your jobs, look out for each other, and come home safe." Marcus was assigned to Forward Operating Base Shank in Logar Province, a dusty outpost surrounded by mountains and suspicious villages. The base housed about 800 soldiers and was considered relatively quiet compared to some of the hotspots in Helmand or Kandahar. Bravo Company's mission was to patrol the area, work with Afghan forces, and protect the supply lines that ran through their sector. Captain Morrison was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in his early 30s, with the kind of calm confidence that came from experience. During their first meeting, he outlined Marcus's role clearly. "You're not just our medic," Morrison said. "You're also our link to the local population. Part of your job will be providing medical care to civilians when we can. The previous medic, Doc Patterson, no relation to the colonel, built good relationships in the villages. I expect you to continue that work." Marcus's first weeks at FOB Shank were spent learning the rhythm of deployment life. He organized the aid station, restocked supplies, and got to know the soldiers he would be responsible for. The company was tight-knit, led by experienced NCOs who looked out for their troops. First Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a career soldier from Texas, took Marcus under his wing. "The thing about being a medic," Rodriguez explained, "is that everyone wants to be your friend. They figure if they're nice to you, you'll take extra good care of them if they get hit. That's not necessarily bad, but don't let it cloud your judgment. When someone's hurt, you treat them based on medical need, not on whether you like them." The first casualty Marcus treated was Private Johnson, who stepped on a piece of rusty metal during a patrol and needed stitches and a tetanus shot. It was routine medical care, nothing dramatic, but it gave Marcus confidence in his abilities. Johnson was back on patrol 2 days later, joking that Doc Rivera had magic hands. More challenging was his first encounter with civilian casualties. A roadside bomb had exploded near a village market, killing 2 insurgents but also wounding several civilians, including children. Marcus worked alongside an Air Force flight surgeon who had helicoptered in for the mass casualty event. Together, they treated a little girl with shrapnel wounds, an elderly man with a broken leg, and a woman with severe lacerations. The little girl, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, reminded Marcus of his sister Maria at that age. She was brave, trying not to cry as Marcus cleaned and dressed her wounds. He spoke to her softly in the few words of Pashto he had learned, and she managed a small smile when he gave her a piece of candy from his medical pack. "You did good work today," the Air Force surgeon told Marcus afterward. "That girl will be fine because of what you did. Don't underestimate how important that is." That night, Marcus wrote in the journal Dr. Chen had given him, He described the little girl's smile, the gratitude in her father's eyes, the way the village elders had thanked him in broken English. It felt good to write about the positive moments, to remember why he had become a medic in the first place. As the weeks passed, Marcus settled into the routine of deployment. Morning patrols, medical sick call, equipment maintenance, and the endless cycle of guard duty and rest. He treated everything from combat injuries to stomach bugs, homesickness to heat exhaustion. The soldiers in Bravo Company learned to trust him, and he learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when someone was struggling with more than physical problems. The Afghan soldiers they worked with were a mixed group. Some were professional and motivated, others seemed to be going through the motions. Marcus made an effort to build relationships with their medics, sharing medical knowledge and techniques. Language was often a barrier, but medicine had its own universal language, and they found ways to communicate about patient care. 3 months into his deployment, Marcus received word that Dr. Ah Chen had nominated him for a medical scholarship program that would pay for his education after his military service. The letter from home felt like a lifeline, a reminder that there was a world beyond the dust and danger of Afghanistan. He wrote back to Dr. Chen, telling her about the work he was doing and how much her early mentorship had meant to him. "I think about what you taught me every day," he wrote, "about having good hands and a good heart. I hope I'm living up to that." The letter he didn't write was to Elena. He wanted to tell his mother about the fears that woke him up at night, about the responsibility he felt for every soldier in the company, about the dreams where he couldn't save someone who was counting on him. But he didn't want to worry her more than she already was. Instead, he focused on his work. The aid station became his sanctuary, a place where he could help people and make a tangible difference. Soldiers came to him not just for medical care, but for advice, for someone to listen, for reassurance that they were going to be okay. Marcus realized that being a medic meant being part doctor, part counselor, part big brother, and part priest. It was more responsibility than he had expected, but it was also more rewarding than he had imagined. Captain Morrison noticed Marcus's dedication and began including him in planning sessions for missions that might require medical support. Marcus appreciated being part of the decision-making process, understanding not just what his role would be, but why the mission mattered. It made him feel like more than just a medical technician. He was a valued member of the team. The seasons changed, bringing cooler weather and different challenges. The insurgent activity in their sector remained relatively low, but everyone knew that could change quickly. Intelligence reports suggested that enemy fighters were moving into the area, possibly planning something significant. The patrols became more tense, the soldiers more alert to potential threats. Marcus used the quieter periods to improve his skills. He practiced procedures until they became second nature, studied every medical manual he could find, and even learned basic veterinary care for the working dogs that sometimes accompanied their patrols. His reputation as a thorough and caring medic spread beyond Bravo Company, and other units began requesting his assistance for complex cases. One evening, as Marcus was finishing his rounds in the aid station, First Sergeant Rodriguez stopped by for his usual check-in. They had developed an easy friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to the troops. "You know, Doc," Rodriguez said, "the men talk about you. They say you're the kind of medic who won't let anyone die on your watch. That's a hell of a reputation to live up to." Marcus nodded, understanding the weight of those words. Every medic knew that reputation was built on successful cases, but could be destroyed by a single failure, especially if that failure happened at the wrong time or in front of the wrong people. But he also knew that the soldiers needed to believe in their medic's abilities. Their confidence in him could be the difference between a soldier fighting to stay alive and one who gave up hope. "I just try to do my job," Marcus replied. "That's what makes you good at it," Rodriguez said. "You don't think about the glory or the recognition. You just focus on the work." As his deployment passed the halfway mark, Marcus began to feel like a veteran. He moved through the daily routines with confidence, handled medical emergencies calmly, and had earned the respect of everyone in the company. He thought he understood what combat medicine was all about. He thought he was prepared for anything the war might throw at him. He had no idea how wrong he was. The morning of March 15th started like any other day at FOB Shank. Marcus woke at 0500, checked the medical supplies for the day's patrol, and grabbed a quick breakfast of coffee and a protein bar. The mission briefing was routine. A presence patrol through the village of Karez-e-Mula, meetings with local elders, and a stop at the school where Army engineers had been helping with renovations. Intelligence reports suggested low enemy activity in the area, making it what the soldiers called a milk run. Dangerous enough to require full combat gear, but unlikely to result in serious contact. Captain Morrison led the briefing with his usual thoroughness. "We'll be out there for about 6 hours," he told the assembled soldiers. "The route takes us through some areas where we've had IED activity before, so stay alert. Doc Rivera will be with First Squad, Sergeant Patterson's team. Any questions?" Marcus raised his hand. "Sir, what's the medical situation in the village? Do we expect any requests for civilian treatment?" "Possible," Morrison replied. "The village elder mentioned that some children have been sick. Nothing serious, but if we have time, we'll set up a quick sick call. Pack accordingly." Marcus nodded and made mental notes about what extra supplies to bring. Child-friendly medications, rehydration salts, basic antibiotics for common infections. These civilian medical encounters were often the most rewarding part of his deployment, chances to build goodwill and help people who had limited access to health care. Sergeant Tony Patterson was a veteran of 2 previous deployments, a steady NCO who looked out for his soldiers while maintaining the alertness that kept everyone alive. His squad included Private First Class Danny Chen, Specialist Miguel Santos, Private Tommy Williams, and Corporal Jake Morrison, the captain's younger brother, a fact that everyone knew but never talked about. Marcus had worked with Patterson's squad multiple times and trusted their professionalism. The patrol left FOB Shank at 0800, moving in 2 armored vehicles toward the village. The landscape was typical for the region. Barren mountains, dry creek beds, and clusters of mud brick buildings that seemed to blend into the earth itself. The roads were rough, and Marcus felt every bump and pothole as the vehicle bounced along. He used the travel time to review his medical kit one more time, a habit that had become second nature. "How many times you gonna check that bag, Doc?" Santos asked with a grin. "You know everything's in there?" "Better to check 10 times too many than 1 time too few," Marcus replied, echoing advice he had gotten from his mentor, Staff Sergeant Martinez, during training. The village of Karez-e-Mula was larger than some they visited, with about 200 residents living in compounds spread along a valley floor. The main road through the village was wide enough for their vehicles, but was flanked by buildings and alleyways that could conceal threats. Standard procedure was to dismount and conduct the patrol on foot, leaving 1 soldier with each vehicle for security. Village Elder Habibullah met them at the edge of the settlement, as he always did. He was an elderly man with a white beard and tired eyes who spoke decent English and served as the unofficial spokesperson for the community. Marcus had treated his granddaughter for an ear infection a few months earlier, and the old man always asked about American medicine and medical practices. "Welcome, friends," Habibullah said, shaking hands with Captain Morrison and the patrol leaders. "The children are in school, as you asked. The teacher is very grateful for the new desks." The patrol moved through the village in standard formation, with soldiers maintaining security while Morrison and the interpreter spoke with residents. Marcus walked with First Squad, keeping an eye on the soldiers under his care while also observing the civilians they encountered. Something felt different about this visit, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly what it was. "You notice how quiet it is?" Private Williams asked quietly, echoing Marcus's own thoughts. Patterson nodded grimly. Where are all the kids? Usually they're following us around by now." It was true. Normally, their patrols attracted curious children who waved and asked for candy or pens. Today, the streets seemed almost empty except for a few elderly men and women who watched the patrol with expressions that Marcus couldn't read. The school visit went smoothly. The children were indeed in class, working at the new desks that Army engineers had delivered the previous week. The teacher, a young man named Ahmad, was enthusiastic about the improvements and showed them student artwork that decorated the walls. Marcus distributed pencils and small notebooks to the children, enjoying their excitement over the simple gifts. "The children want to thank you," Ahmad told Marcus through the interpreter. "They have written letters to American children. Would you take them?" Marcus accepted a bundle of carefully folded papers, each decorated with colorful drawings. He promised to make sure they reached American schools, though he wasn't sure exactly how he would accomplish that. It was the kind of promise that seemed important to make, regardless of the logistics. Elder Habibullah approached Marcus as they prepared to leave the school. "Doctor," he said, using the title that many villagers had given Marcus, "my neighbor's wife is having difficult pregnancy. Could you examine her?" Medical care for pregnant women was outside Marcus's training, but he couldn't refuse a direct request for help. "I can take a look," he said, "but if it's serious, she needs to get to a real hospital." Habibullah's neighbor lived in a compound about 200 meters from the school, down a narrow street lined with high walls. Marcus informed Sergeant Patterson about the medical request, and the squad adjusted their security posture to cover the additional stop. Captain Morrison approved the diversion, though he radioed for the patrol to be ready to move out within 20 minutes. The compound was typical for the area. Mud brick walls surrounding a courtyard with several rooms opening onto it. The woman, who appeared to be in her early 20s, was indeed pregnant and experiencing severe morning sickness that had left her dehydrated and weak. Marcus checked her vital signs, started an IV for rehydration, and gave her medication to settle her stomach. "She needs to see a doctor who specializes in pregnancy care," Marcus told her husband through the interpreter. "The clinic in the district center has someone who can help her properly." The woman's improvement was almost immediate once the IV fluid started working. She managed to drink some water and even smiled when Marcus showed her how to take the anti-nausea medication he was leaving with her. Her husband was grateful beyond words, pressing Marcus's hands and speaking rapidly in Pashto. "He says you are a gift from God," the interpreter explained. "He says his family will never forget your kindness." As they prepared to leave the compound, Marcus felt the satisfaction that always came from successful medical care. This was why he had become a medic, to help people who needed it, to make a real difference in someone's life. The woman would be fine now, and her baby would have a better chance of being born healthy. The patrol was forming up for the return journey to Fob Shank when Sergeant Patterson noticed something wrong. "Where's Chen?" he asked, doing a quick head count of his squad. Private First Class Chen had been providing security for the vehicle, while the rest of the squad was in the compound. Now both he and the vehicle were gone. "Chen, report!" Patterson spoke into his radio. There was no response. Captain Morrison immediately ordered the patrol to establish a defensive perimeter while they figured out what had happened. The village street suddenly felt much more dangerous, with too many windows and doorways that could hide threats. Marcus found himself checking his rifle, ensuring a round was chambered and the safety was off. "There," Specialist Santos pointed toward a side street. "Smoke." A thin column of black smoke was rising from somewhere beyond the village center. Morrison made the decision immediately. They would investigate, but carefully. If Chen had been taken or if the vehicle had been attacked, they needed to know. The patrol moved tactically toward the smoke, with soldiers covering each other as they advanced from building to building. Marcus stayed with the center element, ready to provide medical aid if needed. His heart was beating faster now, the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with potential danger. They found Chen's vehicle overturned in a drainage ditch about 300 meters from where they had left it. The MRIP had obviously been hit by an improvised explosive device, and smoke was still rising from the engine compartment. There was no sign of Chen. "Search pattern," Morrison ordered. "Find our soldier." They found Chen 20 meters from the vehicle, unconscious but alive, thrown clear when the IED detonated. Marcus reached him first and immediately began his assessment. Concussion, probable broken ribs, lacerations from flying debris, but nothing immediately life-threatening. Chen's body armor had saved his life. "Chen! Chen, can you hear me?" Marcus called as he worked. The soldier's eyes opened, unfocused and confused. "Doc? What happened?" Chen's voice was weak and slurred. "IED got your vehicle. You're hurt, but you're going to be okay. Just stay still and let me work." Marcus was inserting an IV line when the first shots rang out. The ambush was perfectly planned. The insurgents had used Chen's vehicle as bait, knowing the patrol would have to investigate. As soon as the Americans were clustered around the wounded soldier and disabled vehicle, gunfire erupted from multiple positions around the village perimeter. The sound was deafening. Automatic rifle fire, machine guns, and the distinctive crack of sniper rounds passing overhead. "Ambush! Ambush!" Patterson screamed into his radio as soldiers dove for cover behind the overturned vehicle and scattered boulders. Marcus threw himself over Chen, shielding his patient's body with his own, while bullets snapped through the air above them. His mind raced through the tactical medical protocols he had trained on. Treat the patient, but don't become a casualty yourself. There was no cover where Chen lay, nothing but open ground between them and the nearest protection. "Doc, get to cover!" Santos yelled from behind a low wall 30 meters away. But Marcus couldn't move Chen without risking further injury to the soldier's spine, and he couldn't leave him exposed in the open. For a moment, Marcus froze, paralyzed by an impossible choice between his medical responsibilities and basic survival. The decision was made for him when he saw muzzle flashes from a building directly ahead. The insurgents were trying to finish off the wounded American, and Chen was completely helpless. Marcus did something that went against every instinct he had developed as a medic. He picked up his rifle. The shot was not particularly difficult, about 75 meters to a stationary target, but it was the first time Marcus had ever fired a weapon in combat. The insurgent dropped immediately, his rifle clattering to the ground. Marcus felt sick and relieved at the same time. "Nice shot, Doc!" Williams yelled. But there was no time to process what had happened. More gunfire was coming from multiple directions, and the patrol was pinned down in a bad position. Captain Morrison's voice was calm on the radio as he called for helicopter support and additional ground units, but help was at least 20 minutes away. Marcus dragged Chen toward better cover, pulling the unconscious soldier behind a large boulder that offered protection from at least one direction. The movement drew more fire, and he felt the shock waves as bullets passed close enough to touch. His hands shook as he worked to stabilize Chen's condition while the firefight raged around them. "Santos is hit!" The call came from Corporal Morrison, who was trying to provide covering fire from a position near the overturned vehicle. Marcus looked toward Santos's position and saw the specialist lying motionless behind a low wall. He was about 20 meters away, separated by open ground that was being swept by machine gun fire. Getting to him would mean crossing that kill zone with no cover at all. "Doc, don't even think about it!" Sergeant Patterson yelled. "You can't make that run!" But Marcus was already moving. Later, he would not remember making the conscious decision to attempt the rescue. His training simply took over. Wounded soldier, medical care required, everything else secondary. He sprinted across the open ground in a zigzag pattern, bullets striking the ground around his feet and whining off nearby rocks. Santos had been hit in the leg, a through-and-through wound that was bleeding heavily but had missed the major blood vessels. "I'm okay, Doc," Santos gasped. "It's not that bad." Marcus applied pressure bandages and a tourniquet while crouched behind inadequate cover. Santos was right. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but he was losing blood fast and wouldn't be able to move without assistance. The problem was getting back. The insurgents had adjusted their fire, and the route Marcus had taken to reach Santos was now completely covered by crossfire. They were trapped. "Patterson, this is Rivera," Marcus spoke into his radio. "Santos is stable, but we're pinned down. Need covering fire to get him out." "Negative, Doc. Too much incoming. Stay put until we can suppress those positions." But staying put meant watching Santos slowly weaken from blood loss while the firefight continued around them. Marcus looked at the tactical situation and realized that the machine gun position that was keeping them trapped was in a building about 60 meters to their left. If someone could eliminate that gun crew, the patrol might be able to maneuver and establish fire superiority. The building was too far for an accurate shot with his rifle, especially under combat conditions. But Marcus remembered the M203 grenade launcher attached to his weapon, a 40mm system that could put an explosive round through a window at that range. He had qualified with the weapon during training, but had never considered actually using it in combat. "Santos, can you lay down covering fire if I try to take out that machine gun?" Marcus asked. Santos nodded grimly. Despite his wound, he could still operate his rifle. "What do you need me to do?" "Just keep their heads down for about 10 seconds. I'm going to try something." Marcus had never been so scared in his life. Every medic instinct he possessed was screaming at him to focus on medical care, to let the riflemen handle the fighting. But there were no riflemen in position to eliminate the machine gun, and Santos would die if they stayed pinned down much longer. The grenade launcher had a simple sight system, but using it accurately required practice that Marcus didn't have. He estimated the range, adjusted for the slight uphill angle, and tried to remember everything he had learned during training. His hands were steady, despite the fear, muscle memory taking over when conscious thought failed him. Santos opened fire, spraying automatic rounds at the machine gun position to force the crew to take cover. Marcus rose from behind their shelter, aimed carefully at the window where the muzzle flashes were coming from, and squeezed the trigger. The 40mm grenade arced through the air and exploded exactly where Marcus had aimed it. The machine gun fire stopped immediately, and he could see debris falling from the building's upper floor. Santos looked at him with amazement. "Holy shit, Doc, that was perfect!" With the machine gun eliminated, the tactical situation changed dramatically. Patterson's squad was able to advance and establish better firing positions, suppressing the remaining insurgent positions. Captain Morrison coordinated the movement of both squads, gradually gaining fire superiority and forcing the enemy fighters to withdraw. The firefight lasted another 10 minutes before the last shots faded away. Marcus worked frantically to treat the wounded, Santos, Chen, and Private Williams, who had taken shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade that struck near his position. All three would survive, though Williams needed immediate evacuation to the combat hospital at Bagram. As the medical evacuation helicopter landed in the village center, kicking up enormous clouds of dust, Captain Morrison approached Marcus. The medic was sitting beside Chen's stretcher, monitoring his patient's condition and preparing him for transport. "Doc, we need to talk about what happened here," Morrison said. Marcus looked up, expecting criticism for abandoning his medical duties to engage in combat. Instead, he saw something like admiration in the captain's eyes. "That machine gun would have killed Santos, maybe more of us," Morrison continued. "You saved lives today, and not just with medical care. Command is going to want a full debrief." The helicopter crew took over care of the wounded soldiers, and Marcus watched as they were loaded for transport to better medical facilities. Santos gave him a thumbs up as the bird lifted off, and Marcus felt the exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him shaky and nauseous. Elder Habibullah approached cautiously as the patrol prepared to return to their base. The old man's face was grave, but his eyes showed relief that the fighting was over. "Doctor," he said to Marcus, "I am sorry this happened in our village. The bad men, they come from outside, force us to help them, or they hurt our families." Marcus nodded, understanding more about the complexity of the war than he had that morning. The villagers were caught between the coalition forces trying to help them and the insurgents who threatened them. There were no simple answers. No clear lines between friend and enemy. "The woman you helped," Habibullah continued, "she says to tell you that her baby will be named Marcus if it is a boy. She says you gave life twice today." The patrol's return to Fob Shank was quiet, each soldier processing what had happened in his own way. Marcus stared out at the landscape, thinking about the man he had killed, about the grenade he had fired, about the lives he had saved. Everything he thought he knew about being a medic had changed in the space of 2 hours. First Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting when they returned. "Doc, you okay?" he asked, studying Marcus's face. "I think so, First Sergeant. It was intense." Rodriguez nodded knowingly. "Your first real firefight always is. But I heard what you did out there. Taking out that machine gun, getting to Santos under fire, that's not medic work, that's soldier work. You did both jobs today." That night, Marcus sat in the aid station trying to write in his journal, but the words wouldn't come. How could he describe the moment when he had decided to kill someone? How could he explain the satisfaction he had felt when the grenade found its target? How could he reconcile the medic who had saved a pregnant woman that morning with the soldier who had killed an enemy fighter that afternoon? Dr. Chen's gift seemed inadequate now, too small to contain the complexity of what he had experienced. He thought about her instruction to write about the people he helped, to remember that every life saved mattered. But what about the life he had taken? Did that matter too? The questions would follow him for the rest of his deployment and beyond, but one thing was certain. Marcus Rivera was no longer the same medic who had awakened that morning believing he understood the boundaries of his role. The war had shown him that sometimes saving lives required taking them, and that being a healer didn't exempt him from being a warrior when circumstances demanded it. The other soldiers in Bravo Company looked at him differently now. They had always respected him as their medic, but now they saw him as something more, a soldier who would fight for his brothers when fighting was what they needed most. It was a reputation that both honored and burdened him, one that would shape the rest of his time in Afghanistan and his entire life afterward. The investigation into the ambush at Karez-i-Mula began the next morning. Colonel Patterson personally interviewed every member of the patrol, reconstructing the timeline of events and analyzing the tactical decisions that had led to both the successful rescue and the elimination of the insurgent threat. Marcus sat across from the colonel in the small conference room at Fob Shank, still trying to process everything that had happened. "Sergeant Rivera," Colonel Patterson began, using the rank that Marcus had recently been promoted to, "I want you to walk me through your decision-making process during the firefight. Specifically, what led you to engage the machine gun position with the grenade launcher?" Marcus had been dreading this question. Military protocol was clear about medics engaging in combat. They were authorized to fight in self-defense and in defense of their patients, but their primary role was medical care. Some interpretations of the Geneva Convention suggested that medics who actively engaged in combat could lose their protected status. "Sir, Specialist Santos was losing blood and couldn't be moved while that machine gun had us pinned down," Marcus explained. "The squad was suppressed and couldn't get into position to eliminate the threat. I assessed that Santos would die if we remained in place, and that the only way to extract him was to neutralize the machine gun position." Colonel Patterson made notes as Marcus spoke, occasionally asking for clarification about timing or tactical details. The interview lasted almost 2 hours, covering every aspect of the engagement from the initial IED explosion through the medical evacuation of the wounded. "One more question," Patterson said as the interview concluded. "Do you regret your decision to engage in direct combat?" Marcus had been asking himself the same question since the firefight ended. "No, sir. I regret that the situation required it, but given the same circumstances, I would make the same choices again. My job is to save lives, and that's what I did." Colonel Patterson smiled slightly. "That's exactly the answer I was hoping for. You're going to be recommended for the Silver Star, Sergeant. Your actions were far above and beyond what anyone could reasonably expect from a medic." The Silver Star recommendation was unexpected. Marcus had heard of medics receiving Bronze Stars for medical heroism, but the Silver Star was typically reserved for exceptional combat valor. The idea that his actions merited such recognition felt overwhelming. Word of the recommendation spread quickly through FOB Shank. Soldiers who had previously seen Marcus as just the medic now looked at him with a different kind of respect. Specialist Santos, who had returned to duty after a week of recovery, made sure everyone knew that Marcus had saved his life twice, once with medical care and once by eliminating the machine gun that was about to kill him. "Doc's not just a healer," Santos told anyone who would listen. "He's a warrior when he needs to be." The attention made Marcus uncomfortable. He had never sought recognition for his medical work, and he certainly hadn't been thinking about awards when he made his split-second decisions during the ambush. All he had wanted was to bring his soldiers home alive. Captain Morrison noticed Marcus's discomfort with the increased attention. "You know, Doc, leadership comes in many forms. Sometimes it's about making the hard decisions under pressure. Sometimes it's about doing things others can't or won't do. What happened at Karezi Mullah was both." The psychological impact of the firefight was something Marcus struggled with privately. The Army's combat stress counselors were available, but Marcus was reluctant to seek help. He worried that admitting to emotional difficulties might reflect poorly on his fitness for duty or suggest that he couldn't handle the pressures of deployment. Staff Sergeant Elena Martinez, his former instructor from medical training, happened to be visiting FOB Shank as part of a medical readiness inspection team when she heard about the ambush. She sought out Marcus immediately. "Rivera, how are you holding up?" she asked, pulling him aside for a private conversation. "I'm fine, Staff Sergeant," Marcus replied automatically. Martinez fixed him with the same stern look she had used during training. "That's bullshit, and we both know it. Killing someone changes you, especially the first time. Even when it's justified, even when it saves lives, it's still taking a life. You need to talk about it." Under Martinez's gentle but persistent questioning, Marcus finally opened up about his conflicted feelings. He described the satisfaction he had felt when the grenade found its target, followed immediately by revulsion at being pleased about killing another human being. He talked about questioning whether he was still the same person who had entered the medical corps to save lives, not take them. "Listen to me carefully," Martinez said when Marcus finished. "You are exactly the medic the Army needs, someone who understands that saving lives sometimes requires hard choices. The enemy doesn't care that you're a medic. They'll kill you and your patients if they get the chance. What you did was use all your training, medical and military, to protect the soldiers under your care." Martinez also helped Marcus understand that his emotional response was normal and healthy. "If killing didn't affect you at all, I'd be worried about you. The fact that you're struggling with it shows that you're still the same good man who became a medic to help people." The conversation with Martinez was a turning point for Marcus. He began meeting regularly with the unit chaplain, not for religious guidance, but for someone to talk through the moral complexity of his situation. Chaplain Williams, a former infantry officer who understood combat, helped Marcus see that his actions during the ambush were consistent with his values as a healer, not contradictory to them. "Sometimes protecting life requires ending life," Chaplain Williams explained. "That's a burden warriors have carried throughout history. The fact that you carry it thoughtfully, that you don't take it lightly, makes you the right person to bear it. Marcus also found unexpected support from an unlikely source: village elder Habibullah. A few weeks after the ambush, the patrol returned to Karezemula for follow-up security operations. The elder approached Marcus privately, away from the other soldiers. "Doctor," Habibullah said, "the men you fought were not from our village. They came from Pakistan, forced us to help them. When you defeated them, you saved our village too. My people are grateful." The elder's words helped Marcus understand the broader context of his actions. The insurgents hadn't just been threatening American soldiers. They had been terrorizing the local population, using intimidation and violence to force cooperation. By eliminating the machine gun position and helping drive off the attackers, Marcus had indeed saved lives, not just Santos and the other wounded Americans, but potentially many Afghan civilians as well. 3 months later, the Silver Star recommendation was approved by higher headquarters. The award ceremony was held at FOB Shank, with Colonel Patterson reading the citation aloud to the assembled soldiers of Bravo Company. For gallantry in action against an armed enemy of the United States, while serving as a combat medic with Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 75th Infantry Regiment, in Afghanistan. When his patrol was ambushed by insurgent forces and multiple soldiers were wounded, Sergeant Rivera repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire to provide medical aid to wounded soldiers. When enemy machine gun fire prevented the evacuation of a critically wounded soldier, Sergeant Rivera, with complete disregard for his own safety, engaged and destroyed the enemy position with precise grenade fire, enabling the successful extraction of the wounded soldier and contributing directly to the tactical success of the engagement. As Colonel Patterson pinned the Silver Star on Marcus's uniform, the assembled soldiers applauded with genuine enthusiasm. Santos was there, fully recovered from his wound, grinning widely at his medic. Captain Morrison nodded approvingly, and First Sergeant Rodriguez wiped away what might have been dust from his eyes. But the moment that meant the most to Marcus came after the ceremony, when Private Chen approached him quietly. Chen had recovered completely from his concussion and had returned to full duty, but Marcus knew the soldier was still dealing with survivor's guilt about the IED attack. "Doc," Chen said, "I never properly thanked you. When I was lying there after the IED, confused and hurt, you protected me. You put yourself between me and the enemy. That's not something I'll ever forget." Marcus realized that the Silver Star, impressive as it was, wasn't the real measure of success. The real measure was soldiers like Chen who were alive and healthy, continuing their service because someone had been there to help them when they needed it most. The remainder of Marcus's deployment was less eventful but no less meaningful. Word of his actions at Karezemula spread throughout the battalion, and other units began requesting his assistance for high-risk missions. Marcus found himself working with Special Operations Forces, explosive ordnance disposal teams, and other specialized units that appreciated having a medic who could fight if necessary while still providing top-quality medical care. One mission particularly stood out: a joint operation with Afghan Special Forces to capture a high-value target resulted in a complex firefight in an urban environment. When the Afghan unit's medic was wounded, Marcus had to provide medical care to both American and Afghan casualties while the battle raged around them. His ability to communicate basic medical terminology in Pashto, learned through months of treating local civilians, proved crucial in coordinating care. "You are like Afghan warrior," one of the Afghan soldiers told him afterward. "You fight when must fight, heal when must heal. This is good soldier." Marcus also continued his civilian medical work whenever possible. He treated sick children, helped with difficult pregnancies, and even assisted with a complicated surgery when the district medical clinic requested help. These civilian encounters reminded him why he had become a medic in the first place and helped balance the combat aspects of his deployment. Dr. Chen's journal became a repository for these experiences. Marcus wrote about the little girl who had been afraid of needles until he showed her how to be brave like a soldier. He described the old man with diabetes who walked for 2 days to reach a clinic where Marcus was providing care. He recorded the story of a young Afghan medic who wanted to learn American trauma techniques and spent hours practicing with Marcus on training dummies. As his deployment neared its end, Marcus reflected on how much he had changed. The quiet young man who had arrived at Firebound Stories almost a year earlier had evolved into a confident leader who could make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure. He had learned that being a medic didn't mean being passive or non-combative. It meant using every tool available to preserve life. The farewell ceremony in the village of Karezi was particularly moving. Elder Habibullah presented Marcus with a hand-carved wooden box that contained a traditional Afghan scarf and a letter written in careful English. "For the American doctor who saved many lives," the letter read. "You showed us that healing and fighting can come from the same good heart. Our village will remember your kindness always. May God protect you and your family." The woman whose difficult pregnancy Marcus had treated during that fateful patrol was there with her healthy baby son. True to her promise, she had named him Marcus, and the child, now 8 months old, reached out chubby hands toward the American soldier who had helped bring him safely into the world. "This boy will know your story," the woman said through an interpreter. "He will know that an American healer saved his life before he was even born." Back at Firebound Stories for his final weeks, Marcus worked to transition his responsibilities to the incoming medic, a newly graduated specialist named Jackson, who reminded Marcus of himself a year earlier. Marcus took time to share not just medical knowledge, but also the harder-earned wisdom about making moral choices under pressure. "The thing about being a combat medic," Marcus explained to Jackson, "is that you have to be ready for anything. Most of the time, you'll be treating routine injuries and illnesses, but sometimes the situation will demand more from you than just medical care. When that happens, remember that your ultimate mission is to preserve life, whatever form that takes." Jackson listened intently as Marcus described the equipment, procedures, and relationships that made the aid station function effectively. But the younger medic also asked about the ambush at Karezi, having heard the story from multiple soldiers in the unit. "Were you scared?" Jackson asked. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "But fear isn't necessarily a bad thing. It keeps you alert, makes you careful. The trick is not letting it paralyze you when action is needed." Captain Morrison wrote Marcus's final evaluation, rating him among the top medics he had worked with during his military career. "Sergeant Rivera represents the ideal combat medic," Morrison wrote. "He combines exceptional medical skills with tactical awareness and moral courage. His actions during the Karezi ambush exemplify the warrior-healer concept that defines the best military medical personnel." First Sergeant Rodriguez's farewell was more personal. "Doc, you came here as a medic, and you're leaving as a leader. The soldiers in this company are better because you were here. Some of them are alive because you were here. That's a hell of a legacy." The flight home was bittersweet. Marcus was eager to see his family and return to his civilian life, but he was also leaving behind soldiers who had become brothers and a mission that had given his life profound meaning. As the transport plane lifted off from Bagram Air Base, Marcus looked down at the Afghan landscape one last time, thinking about all the people whose lives had touched his during the deployment. Elena was waiting at the airport in Los Angeles, along with Maria and several extended family members. The reunion was emotional, with tears and embraces and too many people trying to talk at once. But Marcus noticed how his mother studied his face, searching for changes that went beyond the obvious physical signs of deployment. "You look older, mijo," Elena said quietly during the drive home. "But not in a bad way, like you've learned things that made you grow up." Marcus nodded, thinking about how to explain the transformation he had undergone. I learned that helping people sometimes requires hard choices, Mama. I learned that being good at something means being willing to use those skills when they're needed, even if it's not comfortable. Dr. Chen hosted a welcome home dinner at her clinic, inviting Marcus to share his experiences with the volunteer staff who had supported him throughout his deployment. Marcus brought some of the children's letters from the Afghan school, and Dr. Chen helped arrange for them to be delivered to local elementary schools as part of a cultural exchange program. "You've become exactly what I hoped you would," Dr. Chen told Marcus. "Someone who understands that medicine is about more than just treating symptoms. It's about protecting and preserving human dignity." Marcus used his GI Bill benefits to attend nursing school, focusing on trauma and emergency care. His military medical experience, combined with the leadership skills he had developed, made him an exceptional student. His instructors quickly recognized his practical knowledge and often asked him to share real-world examples with his classmates. But it was his final paper for a medical ethics course that truly captured what Marcus had learned in Afghanistan. The assignment was to write about a situation where medical and moral considerations had come into conflict, and to analyze how those conflicts had been resolved. Marcus wrote about the ambush at Kharez-i-Mulla, describing the moment when he had to choose between his identity as a healer and the immediate tactical necessity of eliminating a threat to his patients. He analyzed the ethical frameworks that supported both military medical protocols and the Geneva Convention provisions regarding medical personnel. The traditional conception of medical neutrality assumes a clear distinction between combatants and non-combatants, between those who heal and those who harm, Marcus wrote. But modern warfare often blurs these lines, placing medical personnel in situations where passive neutrality may actually result in the death of those they are sworn to protect. He continued. In such situations, the medical professional must expand their understanding of do no harm to encompass not just direct medical interventions, but all actions necessary to preserve life and prevent suffering. This may include engaging in combat when such engagement is the only means available to protect patients and preserve the medical mission. The paper concluded, "The warrior healer is not a contradiction in terms, but rather a recognition that healing sometimes requires courage that goes beyond medical knowledge. The medic who is prepared to fight when fighting is necessary is not abandoning their medical ethics, but fulfilling them in the most complete way possible." Marcus's professor, a veteran emergency physician who had worked in conflict zones, wrote extensive comments on the paper. "This is the kind of moral reasoning we need more of in military medicine," she noted. "You've identified a crucial evolution in medical ethics that reflects the realities of modern conflict." 5 years after returning from Afghanistan, Marcus was working as a trauma nurse at a major hospital in Los Angeles when he received an unexpected phone call. It was Specialist Santos, now a civilian working in construction, calling to let Marcus know that he was getting married. "Doc, I wanted you to know that I'm naming you as my best man if you'll do it," Santos said. "I know we don't talk regularly, but what you did over there, the way you took care of all of us, that made you family. I wouldn't be here to get married if it wasn't for you." Marcus accepted immediately, honored to be part of such an important moment in Santos's life. At the wedding, he was surprised to see several other veterans from Bravo Company who had maintained contact with Santos over the years. They shared stories and updates, but inevitably the conversation turned to their deployment and the bonds they had forged under fire. "You know what I remember most about Doc?" Private Williams, now a police officer, said during the reception. "It wasn't just that he was good at medical stuff. It was that he never made us feel like we were bothering him, no matter what kind of stupid injury or illness we came to him with. He treated everyone like they mattered." Corporal Morrison, who had become a teacher after leaving the Army, nodded in agreement. "But he was also someone we could count on when things got serious. That ambush proved that Doc wasn't just our medic, he was our brother, and he'd fight for us when we needed him to." Marcus listened to these comments with mixed emotions. He was grateful for the respect and affection his former soldiers showed him, but he was also aware that their memories of him had taken on an almost mythical quality. To them, he represented an ideal of the warrior healer that might be difficult for any real person to live up to. After the wedding, Marcus drove to visit his old neighborhood in East Los Angeles. The clinic where Dr. Chen had first mentored him was still operating, now expanded to include a full-time trauma counselor and a program for veterans dealing with post-deployment adjustment issues. Dr. Chen, now in her 70s but still energetic, welcomed Marcus warmly. "I heard about your Silver Star," she said. "I'm proud of what you accomplished, but more proud of who you became. You found a way to stay true to your values while adapting to circumstances that challenged everything you thought you knew about medicine." They walked through the clinic together, with Dr. Chen introducing Marcus to newer volunteers and describing how his deployment letters had inspired expansions in their services. "Your experiences helped us understand that healing extends beyond individual patients to entire communities," she explained. In the examination room where Dr. Chen had first taught him to take blood pressure, Marcus found a framed photograph that surprised him. It was a picture of him treating Afghan children during one of his civilian medical missions, and below it was a small plaque that read, "Healing knows no boundaries. Example of service above self." "Where did you get this?" Marcus asked. Dr. Chen smiled. "Captain Morrison sent it to me after your deployment. He thought we should know about the good work you were doing over there. It's been inspiring our volunteers ever since." That evening, Marcus sat in his apartment reading through the journal Dr. Chen had given him before deployment. The entries chronicled his evolution from an uncertain young medic to a confident leader who had learned to balance competing moral demands. The final entry, written just before leaving Afghanistan, captured his understanding of what he had learned. "I came here thinking that being a medic meant staying out of the fight, focusing only on healing while others did the hard work of combat. I learned that real healing sometimes requires entering the fight, not to cause harm, but to prevent it. The enemy doesn't respect medical neutrality, and sometimes the only way to protect the innocent is to stop those who would hurt them. I killed a man in that village, and I would do it again if I had to. Not because I enjoyed it or because I wanted to, but because it was the only way to save Santos and the others. That doesn't make me less of a medic. It makes me a more complete one. I understand now that healing and fighting aren't opposites. They're different tools in service of the same mission, preserving life and preventing suffering. When I get home, I want to work with veterans who are struggling to understand their own experiences of moral complexity. I want to help other medics understand that they can be warriors when they need to be without losing their identity as healers. Most importantly, I want to honor the memory of that Afghan fighter I killed by making sure his death contributed to something meaningful, a world where fewer people have to die because of conflict." Marcus closed the journal and looked out the window at the lights of Los Angeles. Somewhere out there were former soldiers dealing with their own moral complexities, their own questions about what they had done and why. Tomorrow he would return to his work at the trauma center, treating victims of violence and accidents, continuing his mission of healing in a different context. But tonight, he simply sat with the weight of his experiences, grateful for the lessons learned and the lives saved, at peace with the choices he had made when there had been no good options available. He was no longer the quiet young man who had once wrapped toy soldiers in strips of cloth, dreaming of healing their wounds. He was something more complex and more complete, a warrior healer who understood that sometimes saving lives required the courage to fight for them.